What is business law? My name is Danya Shakfeh and I'm a business law attorney in Oak Brook, and I'm going to answer that question for you. What is business law? Business law is actually a very broad area of law that encompasses many smaller parts of the law. So I'm going to break it down for you so that you know what business law is. The first aspect of business law is what kind of corporate structure you want. So if you are starting a business, you want to know if you should be a corporation or an LLC, or if you want to stay a sole proprietor. And this is a decision that is made between your lawyer and your accountant, because it's going to affect how your business is run and how you are taxed. Part of that process, especially if you have business partners, is to create the corporate documents, meaning the contracts between the business owners. And these terms will cover things like what happens if there's a dispute between the parties, who owns what part of the business, how you get profits, if you are an employee and an owner of the business, especially for smaller businesses. What happens if someone were to die or become disabled or wants to leave the business. This is all part of creating the corporate documents. Now, in some more simple types of businesses, you only may need one structure, but if you have a more complicated business that has multiple operations, you might actually want multiple companies that are tied together either through ownership or contracts. And so creating that structure can get pretty complicated sometimes. And so that is part of the law of business law. Once you choose your corporate structure or corporate structures and you have it squared away between who owns what, if there are multiple business owners, is knowing what laws to follow in your industry. Now, some industries require licensing, or there are just sometimes rules that you have to follow. Now, those rules could apply to your relationship with money, with the environment, health codes, consumer rights. These are all areas of law that are kind of related to business law. Right. So it's very important to know what laws actually govern your industry, and if you need any licenses. Now, those licenses could be at the federal level, the state level, or even at the local or city level. So having an attorney who is familiar with business law is a huge asset, so that in the long run your business does not become fined or is forced to shut down as a result of not complying with the law. So now you have your corporate structure, you have your licenses, and you know what laws you have to follow. What's next? Contracts. The contracts between other, like your vendors or your clients. These contracts are not only helpful for protecting you, but there are other two just practical reasons to have the contracts. One, the contracts are actually a way to navigate your business model. How you charge your clients, for example, when you want them to pay, how you want them to pay, what they're paying for, that's actually your business model. So talking that through is not only legally beneficial, but also is beneficial for your business. And also having the contracts between your vendors. If you are engaging on a regular basis with vendors, if you are in the manufacturing industry, you're going to have an ongoing relationship. Now, on the surface, it might seem simple. Why do you need a contract? Well, because I'm buying something and they're paying for it. Isn't that the end of the story? No. What happens if there's damage to a product? What happens if someone is late in their delivery and that affects your business? When does the legal ownership transfer? So if I am sending a product to someone else, at what point do I stop owning it, and when do they start owning it? And that's very important in case there is some sort of damage to the product in that space between when it's out of my hands and before it gets to the other side. Insurance. What kind of insurance requirements are there? What happens if there's a dispute? What laws does everybody have to follow, and who's responsible for what? This is very important in an ongoing relationship, and that's why it's important to have contracts. So again, you're going to have contracts between other business owners that you have an ongoing relationship, and contracts between your customers. Now, the contracts could be in the form of a terms of service on your website, or a privacy policy if you have that as well. But the point is, you have something in writing to govern the relationship in case there's a dispute, and so that everybody knows what they're doing and what they're responsible for. Another aspect of business law are investors. Now, this is a more specialized area of law called securities, and that has its own regulations. And so the minute that you ask someone for money to help grow your business and for them to receive a profit, you are entering into the land of securities. There are law firms that only do securities, so they're not complete, business law firms. They actually specialize in securities because that's a very specialized and high risk area of law. The last part of business law is employment law. And there are law firms that only do employment law because that's a whole nother area of law. On the surface, it's just the relationship between the employers and the employees, but then there are other aspects that have to do with if there's a claim for discrimination, all the rules that surround employees' rights, unions, labor law. That's like a whole, if you open that can of worms and you're dealing with a whole separate part of the law, but it can be considered under the umbrella of business law. And so that's an overview of what business law is. If you have any questions or you need help with this area of law, you can call our office at 630-517-5529 or send an email to frontdesk@motivalaw.com.